it's not me, but yet I would, you'd probably look at me and say, I was an athlete, I was in law enforcement and on a SWAT team. And, those are all manly things to do.
Hello and welcome to Share.Care's What is Manly radio show and podcast. Men feel more lonely, lost, and not useful in society than ever in history. Males are not attaching to school, work, or women. What it means to be a man appears lost. Is there a framework for being manly that we can unearth?
Welcome to Share.Care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.Care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.Care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Good morning, Terry, or good evening in your part of the world. How are you?
I'm great, Damien. Thanks for having me on again. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, I always love catching up with you, Terry, and hearing how you're going because, and the struggles that you've been through, and you just always have this upbeat mindset. And we were having this pre-show where we're just giggling and laughing, and we go, no, we better start recording because this is too much fun. So it's great.
Exactly.
For the audience, we have with us Terry Tucker. Now, Terry's combined a 10-year battle with cancer, athletic coaching, and law enforcement background as a foundation for his speaking topics, How to Live Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Purpose, and the 4 Truths for Leading a Resilient Life. And he's also published a book, Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. And it's pretty cool stuff. Great book. Get yourself a hold of it. I've got the link in the show notes, and I've got links to our previous discussions because we've had a couple as well. And Terry, we're talking about manly here on this subset of the podcast, and we're trying to understand or put a framework around what is manly. From what you've seen, if we start more broadly, because it appears men out there are lost, they're lonely, they're not feeling like they're useful in society. What have you seen in that space, and what do you think are the causes of that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't feel like that. So I don't know. I mean, I was raised differently,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I looked at my father, my grandfathers and things like that as to what men were. They were bold, they were brave, they were valiant, they were tough, they were providers. And I think that's, at least today, not necessarily something society wants. But I think if you are those things, it lets you be the things that I think are maybe what we would consider manly today. And I don't think there's anything wrong with those. And that would be, a person of good character, a person of compassion, a person of humility, a person of empathy, a person who cares. And I think whether we talk about manliness or being a woman or whatever this stuff is. I don't like the labels. We are people. We are human beings that are all connected. And if we get cut, we all bleed red blood. And so I just think that we need role models, and we need to be role models for especially the younger generation that's coming up, because it's like, well, you can be anything. Yes, you can. And I've got a daughter who's in the military. When my father was growing up, there's no way that, a female would have been in the military in any way, shape, or form. So my wife and I raised our daughter to be a an independent, somebody who doesn't need anybody else. And I think at the end of the day, we all need each other to be successful and to be happy.
That word independent, I've heard it talked about before, where the stages of life are: you start out dependent as as an infant, you're certainly dependent, and as a child, there's an element of dependency which you kind of throw away a little bit at teenagerhood, thinking you're not independent, probably a little bit too early, but that's kind of normal. And then you move to independent. And then I think it was Dr. Gray talked about it in the Mars and Venus book, if I've got that right, and it was talking about interdependence. I've got my reference there wrong, but it's that stage you go from independent to interdependence. And is it where we've got to, maybe has the pendulum swung too far to we're all going to be independent, and we've lost that interdependence, that we actually need to work together? Particularly, I mean, if you want the species to continue, there's a certain element of working together that we need to do alone when we, well, not alone, but with our partner, to ensure that the species continues.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, and I get, our daughter is married, and they're recently married. She and her husband do not have children, at this point in time, and it's funny because my daughter will say, "I married my father." I mean, my husband is literally my
some
dad.
Freudian stuff in that, isn't there?
Yeah, it is. I mean, he's not as tall as I am and stuff, but he's got the same mannerisms. He's got the same sense of humor. He's got the same intellect and things like that. And I think that in there is somewhere a compliment. That I found that you were a good enough man, a good enough provider. And, I mean, I call myself a provider, but I mean, my wife is the primary breadwinner in our family. It's not me, but yet I would, you'd probably look at me and say, I was an athlete, I was in law enforcement and on a SWAT team. And, those are all manly things to do. Okay. There were women on the SWAT team. There are women in law enforcement. We've opened things up where we can all be part of the solution, just as well as we can all be part of the problem. And so I think you're right. We need to care about each other a lot more. We need to have that empathy that, hey, how can I help you? With no strings attached. There's nothing there. But we need to set the example so that our children can say, that's how you treat another human being. Forget the nomenclature. Forget it's a man or it's a woman. How do you treat another human being? How do you interact with another human being? How do you want another human being to be successful and happy and productive in life? And what's your role in helping them do that?
With the women being on the SWAT team and in the police you referenced, and that's common now, which is a good thing, that women are out there doing all these different things. So that's not an area where I don't think we need to go to, because it's a good thing. As you said, your wife's a provider, and you still see yourself as a provider, but it sounds like you're a provider of different things. It's not a provider of the monetary component. I'm sure there's elements that you do. What is that when you see yourself as a provider? What do you see yourself as a provider of? Is that a shift from just saying, "Oh, I'm the income provider"? But men, we're not that one-dimensional. I don't think we ever were that one-dimensional. I love it when they talk about, and I'm going to maybe ruffle some feathers with this one, but the women I talk to, they go, "Oh, I've got to manage the children, I've got to manage the career," and I'm thinking, well, guys in the 50s, they worked all day. They still had to come home and fix the car. They had to do all the work outside. They had to, deal with a whole bunch of different things. So maybe it's just the women catching up now, because you've got to work and look after the children. Before it was just the children. I know I'm being stereotypical there. But from that perspective, when you look at yourself as the provider, you're not one-dimensional. The same as women are not one-dimensional, which is fantastic that they're not. So how do you, when you say you're a provider, how do you interpret that?
Yeah, I grew up in the 1960s. I was born in 1960. So, my mom did not
rock and roll, man.
Pardon me?
Rock and roll, man.
That's right. but my mom was home, and there was a book that Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton was a president here in the United States, and his wife wrote a book about it takes a village to raise a family, and I think it does.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at it even when I was a kid. If I did something wrong, Mrs. Howitz down the street would kick my butt, send me home and call my mother and say, "Hey, Marilyn, Terry's coming home and this is what he did." And then my mom would kick my butt. And then my dad would come home and I would get my butt kicked the third time. So, it took a village. We took care of each other, and my dad provided the money. My mom ran the house.
Yeah.
Two necessary jobs that needed to be done. And I think today, I mean, at least for me, I worked the night shift as a police officer. So, I would pick my daughter up from school. I would take her to, her piano recitals and her basketball games and her things like that. I would provide in that regard, in addition to, bringing in a paycheck. My wife's paycheck was much bigger than mine, but I provided the health insurance, whereas my wife did. So it really is, I think today, at least it was for my wife and I, where things needed to be done. And we just figured out, okay, are you, I'm available for this. I'll go do that. And you're available for this. You go do. There was no, well, you're the man, you should do this, or you're the woman and you should do that. It's like, this is what needs to get done for the family. And so we figured out how we made that work and we got it done. It didn't matter whether it was a role that was traditionally female or traditionally male. Whatever needed to get done got done for the sake of the family.
So the providing part was just providing what needed to be done at that point in time. And it wasn't a narrow fix going, I provide this, whatever that might be, but it's, as a family, we need this and I'm going to provide it. I love that attitude there. I was wondering from the perspective of, when we look at, this transition, because there was a traditional role models. And it's interesting that it's only in some countries, because other countries don't have it. It seems to be, I mean, I know America, to some extent Australia, there's in England and other countries, European countries, didn't have that. It was definitely, the women were always, very much part of these elements. When we talk about marriage, for example, I know a number of people from different countries, Spain, Cuba, where the woman doesn't take the man's name; they just keep their own names. So it's very, very different dynamic. And from that, do you think part of? I'm just wondering, is it that change, fear of change, that is causing the issue? That you talked about, women being in the SWAT team, and it might have been once a male domain, and all of a sudden there's women in here. And do you think it might be fear of change? And you mentioned being manly as being brave. Is that something that we need to have that shift going? Hey, change happens. Being brave is adapting to that change.
Yeah, I think it is exactly that, and I'm probably going to ruffle some feathers now too. I think women actually make better police officers than men do, because cops. I think of my grandfather, who was a Chicago police officer here in the United States from 1924 to 1954, and I remember, this would never fly today, but I remember my grandmother telling the story that in Chicago the public transportation is elevated. It's called the L. It's above the city, and the peeping toms would stand underneath the stairs and look up the women's skirts as they were going up the stairs to catch the train. And the way the police used to handle that is they would come along and they would kick the peeping toms right in the shin and break their bone, break their leg, and just keep walking. Like, that would never fly today. But that was considered manly. You didn't look up a woman's skirt. That was not something.
I think it still is.
It still is, exactly. But today you'd get arrested for it, or you'd get a ticket for it. Back then they weren't going to do that. They were just going to kick you and break your shin. It's like, did you learn your lesson and move on? And I think that was, especially in law enforcement, military, things like that. It was fighting and things that needed. Ugly things that needed to be done, and the fair sex, pardon my language there, but that's what it used to be called. The fair sex not going to be involved in that. Well, again, today women are much more. I think they make better cops because they use their brain and their mouth much better than men do. Men are willing to go, fisticuffs right off the bat, whereas women are trying to talk somebody into handcuffs because in a lot of cases, let's be honest, they're not as physically strong. They're not as big as a man. So, hey, why am I going to engage in a fight? Why can't I just use my intellect and my words to try to turn you into a yes person and put you in handcuffs so we don't have to fight? Gee, what a novel idea. Why do we have to fight somebody to prove we're manly?
And that's an interesting point because if you go back to a number of texts on that, the art of war, I mean, the first thing is to do your best to avoid it. That takes intellect, that takes skill. And I know from the program I have, Negotiation Magic, which we teach to big corporates, the key sources of power are listening and asking questions and having empathy. And certainly women have the best negotiators in the world come from a female model of how to approach things and with empathy and understanding and listening. And I remember when I was working in the construction sites as well, many, many, many years ago, they preferred women on the equipment, on the big, heavy equipment, because they were gentler with it. So there was less maintenance. It was a lower cost. Guys who said they've been doing burnouts. Not that I ever did that.
I mean, we all have different skills. We all have different talents that, that are unique. And again, how can we blend those, whether male or female? How can we blend those for the betterment of our family, for the betterment of society and things like that? And, if nobody, I'm trying to remember the old saying about, nobody cares who gets the car. It's something, when there's a piano to be moved, everybody wants to grab the stool and do that. Nobody wants to grab the piano and move it, but it's got to get moved. And whether you do it, I do it, my wife does it, your wife does it, whoever does it, as long as it gets done, that's really all that matters. And I think we get too hung up on, well, I'm a guy, I don't do that. Or, I do this. Or you're a woman and you don't do that, you do that. I think those roles, certainly starting back in the 1960s, were starting to blur. That you didn't have to be, where divorce was acceptable. I think back my own parents, all their friends, nobody was divorced. No, there was nobody. But people my dad worked with, absolutely. There, some of they're called secretaries back then, the admins and stuff like that were divorced and needed to work to support themselves and things like that. So those gender roles I think started to blur, and now I think women can do just as well on any topic as men can.
Yeah, and that's what I was wondering from that point of view. Is that the case of this being scared of change, and how do we encourage people to go, hey, this is it's just getting the job done. It doesn't matter what it is. It's you just need to get the job done. It's not about. I think about, for example, Harrison Ford. When he was a big movie star, well, he still is a big movie star, but when he was he was a carpenter originally. And there's numerous stories of, he'll be on a set and see something needs to be done, pick up the hammer and fix it. It wasn't beneath him to do that. Do you think that's an attitude that just, we just change that attitude, that there's nothing beneath us? We're all people, like you said, we all bleed. Just except we need to have that shift. Is that what needs to happen in those spaces?
Well, if you go back 2,000 years, there was another person who was a carpenter that kind of put himself, in a position where it was about giving. It was about what do I need to do, to get the job done and things like that. And you love people like that. You love people like Keanu Reeves, another big superstar who the United States, the guy rides the subway, to a production or to a meeting or something like that. And it's like, you're a big star. You could, but I'm a human being, and we put these people on a pedestal. And then we spend the rest of the time trying to knock them off the pedestal. What's wrong with them? What's bad with them? And things like. And we do. I think back when I was a kid, and baseball was big. I had baseball cards, and I couldn't wait for the spring to come because you could, if you had a dime, you could go to the convenience store and buy a pack of baseball cards that had this big stick of stale gum, but 10 cards with it, and then you're trading your friends and these were the people you emulated. These were the I want to be like Mickey Mantle or I mean, Babe Ruth was way before my time, but Babe Ruth or Lou Gehrig or some of these people, you emulated them because they were good at what they did. That you saw the work they put in, and they were at the time, they could be living in the apartment building down the street from you because they were part of the community, and you could get an autograph. And it was, I mean, today it's all about, there's the haves and the have nots, and I'm in the have not category. So, I don't have that. I don't have the entourage, and, I don't drive a Bentley or an Aston Martin or and one, I don't fit in it. But, secondly, just, I don't do that. But all these people do. They have that stuff. But what are you giving? What are you, is it all about making money? Is it all about, having power, prestige? Because I got news for you. None of that goes with you when you finally leave this planet.
That's an interesting point you raise. And I've had the good fortune of being in a position here in Melbourne anyway, where my stepdaughters went to one of the exclusive schools here. And as a result of that, I got to meet a lot of people, and it was interesting. And I'm wondering whether it's a minority that's out there in the media, because all the people that I met, and these people were super wealthy, hundreds of millions of dollars net worth, and they were the biggest givers. That was an interesting eye opener, because I come from a very my grandparents were war refugees that came with a suitcase. That's what my family started with here in Australia. And certainly when I was growing up, I didn't grow up in a wealthy environment. I don't remember missing out on anything, but I think that was more an attitude that we just enjoyed what we had and made the most of it. But meeting the people that I met, so it was an interesting eye opener for me that these people, and I picked their brains. It was like I'd go say, can I buy you a coffee? I've got some questions I want to ask you. And they always made time. And when talking with them, they always made time to help other people. They always did that. And is that maybe where, this feeling of being lost and lonely is, that it's more about focusing on yourself as opposed to, because we talk about gratitude, and gratitude is, partly being grateful for what you have, but also too, there's an element of giving in that. Do you think part of this lost and lonely that guys are feeling is to do with that inward focus instead of an outward focus?
I do, because I think I experience that when I have, treatments for my cancer. I will, there are days when I will be down, or, I'll feel sad, or I cry, or whatever. And you tend to, when you're in those situations, be looking inward. It's all about me, woe is me, feel sorry for me, and things like that. And I think one of the ways, I know one of the ways that helps me get out of that situation is to project assistance to somebody else. Whether it's just saying hi, or do you want to get a cup of coffee, or do you want to talk? And I go to treatment every 3 weeks for an entire week. So I'm at the hospital a lot. So there's a lot of people that, I could look at and say, boy, they don't look like they're having a good day. Can I make a difference in their lives? Can I say something positive? Now, all of a sudden, the focus is not on me. It's not on woe is me, and look how sad I am, and look how bad I feel. Now I'm starting to interact with another human being. And at least for me, that changes the whole dynamic. That changes the whole perspective. And now I'm focusing on making the life of another human being better. So, yes, I to answer your question, with that story, I think it really does help if we stop thinking about what we can get and maybe focus a little more on what we can give.
How do we, is it just a simple sharing knowledge to get people to realize that that's what we need to do, is just, shift your focus from yourself to making people better? I know, and that's been the case in my life. Whenever there's been a down period, and I'm feeling crap, I remember sitting in my car, back old Datsun 200B that I had. Well, that was a sports model. It had the really cool side stickers and a little the arrow thing on the front and back. But I remember I was in there, and it was tape deck, so that's how old I am. Still had tape deck in my car. And I was listening to this one song. It was something to do with, why won't anybody love me? And I was, sitting in my car crying, going, and then the thing had finished, so I'd play it back and rewind it back to the start and play it again. And I mean, that was very much focused on me. And then later, I got out of that rut. I'll say rut, not a hole, because a rut's kind of got, the edges kicked out, and it's easier to get out of a rut than it is to get out of a hole. Um, and I remember helping out with a number of community groups, and the difference that I felt about myself because I wasn't focusing on myself. But is it a case of, how do we get people to realize that?
Yeah, I mean, I the same with you. I enjoy, coaching or being part. There was a thing here in the United States, the YMCA, Young Men's Christian Association. That getting involved in their programs and okay, I have a certain skill set. Can I use that skill set to help other people? I would say the answer to that is sort of a dynamic, and I think you and I talked about this on a previous podcast. The way I feel we are kind of raised, especially in the West, is that we are born empty, and that we grow up, we go to school and stuff like that, and then once we get into life, we think that our job is to fill ourselves up. I'm this empty vessel. Now I've got to get a great job. I've got to drive a nice car. I've got to live in a nice house. I got to have a great family. I got to get a great education. All this stuff that we fill ourselves up with, and we think that by filling ourselves up with, we are going to, I'm going to feel good about myself. And what I've come to understand is that it's just the opposite. We're not born empty. We're born full with unique gifts and talents. And our job should be, with whatever we do for an occupation, but what our job should be is to empty ourselves out of those gifts and talents for ourselves, for our family, for our community, for our world. And I think if you do that, I mean, think about, everybody's listening to us, think about yourself. When you give of yourself, do you not feel better? It's kind of like giving somebody
dopamine
love.
immediately. I mean, that's been proven in so much research. As soon as you start giving, or as soon as you think a happy thought, so you can walk down the street. You don't even have to change. And I do this all the time. I walk down the street, and I did it deliberately to see how it worked. And I'm not even changing my expression, but I'm wishing the other person well in my mind. I'm feeling good, but it's interesting how I noticed and a lot of people, there was a shift in their behavior. They would smile at me, even though I was really conscious of my facial expression, not to be smiling. So I'm holding my face really still, but I'm thinking, hope you have a good day. And also, they'd kind of look me in the eyes, and then they'd smile, and it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we make life so hard, and yet it is so simple. And
It is.
it is so simple that if we would just give of ourselves instead of getting all this stuff to fill ourselves up, which makes people miserable, and well, I don't have what he has, or I don't make as much money as she does, and so, and then you're resentful, and you're not happy for that person because they make a lot of money or they have a good job. You get resentful, and then you get down and you get depressed, and there's something wrong with me because I don't have what they have. No, there's nothing wrong with you. What gifts do you have that they don't, that you could give to, like you say? Can you just walk down the street and smile at somebody? Hey, how you doing? Have a good day. I mean, what's wrong with spreading a little goodness in the world? I think we all feel better when we do that. Just like love. The more love we give, the more love we get. It's a great way. Great way to live.
I love that. The more love we give, the more love we get. From that component, I mean, you mentioned before about role modeling. I mean, is that a case where we've lost role models? I think, when I look at my background, I grew up doing things with my dad, going to golf and playing lawn bowls, and I went off with the guys there. So I'd be, paired off or fought off, whatever it's called, for golf. You're playing four, and so 18 holes on a golf course with four other guys. It's a long, what's that, 3-4 hours? Depending how well you play, and so we were playing with hacks. So
for me, 8 or 9, yeah, exactly.
But it was a long time to be spending with guys, and I hadn't unfortunate enough to have that when I was growing up. But it seems to me now, when I look out there, you don't have those male areas anymore. You can't have a male gym, and this is not dissing, because women have the women's gyms and completely support that. So this is not about this is not a controversial topic I'm raising here. What I'm talking about is, have we lost that element where we have guy areas? And all the women that I've talked to on this podcast have said we need guy areas. So is it a case we've lost them, and we actually need to have those spaces where we can have, the role models for guys, as much as guys need women in their life as well, but we need that. I remember when I got married, my first marriage, the pastor said, keep your shed. It's important to have that space. It saves marriages, was his thing. Do we need that space? Do we need that? Do men need that man space? And especially as a
the
role
man
model.
cave.
The man. Well, don't want to use that term because an organisation here using that term, which I have an issue with, but that's another story.
Okay. Yeah.
The man cave, yeah. But
I do, and I think back on my life. I am the oldest of three boys. I went to an all-boys Catholic high school. I went to an all-male military college. And so, my entire life until I graduated from college was male-oriented, male-dominated. I played basketball once when I was 9 years old, started and got a scholarship and played in college. So, I only have the focus of, I know what it was like to be men, to be manly, at least the way we defined it then. Mm-hmm. And I think character today is a huge issue when it comes, what kind of a character, and I don't mean a character like, we use that here in the United States, like that guy's a character. That means they're kind of a goof, somebody you don't want to be associated with. But if you are a person of true character, how do you learn that? How do you learn to be somebody of good character? And I always believe that character is caught, not taught. It's not something like you're going to read a book or take a class and it's like, okay, now I took that class. Now I'm a person of good character. No, I think you have to look at people and say, oh, I like the way he handled that, or I like the way she handled that. I want to incorporate that in my life, or I don't like the way that was handled. And that's not something I want to do at all. So, I mean, my dad was my hero. He was my role model. He was somebody that I thought was a good man. He treated my mom well. He treated our family well. He loved us. I kissed my dad goodnight, until I left the house. I mean, in college, I'd be home on break, kiss my dad goodnight. Never thought anything weird. You kiss your dad. Yeah, I love my dad. I love my mom. Kiss my mom too. So, but it was somebody that I could look up to. It was somebody, how do you handle this? I don't know how to handle this, Dad. Somebody died. I don't know. How do I handle this? You talk to them. I remember when I was looking at colleges, I had a university here in the United States that offered me a scholarship to play basketball. And I accepted it verbally. And the signing period had not come yet. And 2 weeks after I accepted it, they called me up and said, hey, we're not sure if we have a scholarship for you, but we'll call you back in a couple of weeks and let you know. And they called back a couple of weeks later and said, we do have the scholarship. Are you going to come? I'm like, sure. I was a kid. I was 17 years old. I didn't understand what was going on. And my dad pulled me aside and he was like, what do you think's going on here? I said, I don't know. Maybe they didn't think they didn't have a scholarship. And he said, I think probably what happened is they found somebody else that they thought was better than you, offered them the scholarship. They said no. And so now they're back to offering it to you. And then he asked the $1 million question. Do you want to play for somebody that offers you something and then takes it back from you and then offers it? Is that a person of good character? I never thought about character at 17 years old. Character, I don't care. I'm playing basketball. I don't care about character. But that was my dad being a role model, teaching me about the world. And so I guess we need those people in our lives, whether they're male or female. We need those mentors in our lives to help us grow, develop, and look and say, that's the way to do it. That's not the way to do it over here.
Character is really important. I know from my son's perspective, that was my focus when he was very little, was developing his character as opposed to education. It was always, he can learn education at any point. Very few people change their character if it's not good as well. It becomes, I suppose it doesn't really matter good or bad. It's just very few people will change their character. So that was my focus and trying to build that up from an early age. And you mentioned that when talking about character, you mentioned earlier at the very beginning, men characteristics being bold, being valiant, being brave. I mean, is that where we need to get back to as well when we look at mm, young men or boys that are just sitting inside, not game to go out because they're scared someone's going to say something to you, like how dare you open the? We're talking about that in the pre-show about opening the door for somebody, and I wonder, as all the people I've talked to about, that seems to be an urban legend because I've never met anyone where they've got in trouble for having the door open for them. Is it a case of having, we need to be encouraging boys to just have that good character, as you mentioned about your dad? He treated others well. If you have that approach, go out there and treat others well. If someone doesn't like that you've opened the door for them, just politely go, okay, and not react in a negative way. Just acknowledge it and move forward. Do we need to have that sort of level of braveness where we just step out and with an intention of treating others well and going about your life?
Yes, to answer your question, and you and I were talking about this before. It's like, do you open a door for a woman? And we, I think, both came to the conclusion I would open a door for anybody, whether it's a man or a woman. I would, for my kid, for whatever. If I was the first person there, I would open the door and hold it for 40 people that were going through the door. It doesn't matter whether they're male or female. And we were talking about character. I think I mentioned this on another podcast as well, that I had an interview for a marketing job, and I was meeting with the senior vice president, and we spent 90 minutes, an hour and a half, and he asked me 0 questions about marketing, not one thing about marketing. Yeah. But he did ask me about my childhood, about my parents, about my relationship with my siblings, about basketball, about college, and all that stuff. And I remember I got the job, and I remember saying to him, well, can you explain to me your kind of unique interviewing style? Because I didn't quite get what was going on there. And he said, well, I've got plenty of people around me that'll tell me whether you're good at marketing, whether you would be a good fit for the team. He said, but what I'm looking to hire are people of good character. And he said, I believe that character is formed in the first 20 years of your life. Certainly you can tweak it and maybe get a little bit better at it as you get older, as you become an adult. But your character's formed in the first 20 years of your life. So that's why all my questions were about, what was it like, with your brothers? What did you learn from having knee surgery? What did you learn from basketball? What did your parents teach you? Because I wanted to see if you were a person of good character. Now, can you imagine having a job interview like that? Where, I'm here for marketing. We're going to talk marketing. No, we're not going to. We're going to talk about your childhood. Yeah. But that's how important character was to him. And we don't have the role models that are modeling that behavior. Here's what you do. You open a door for people. You say please. You say thank you. It's amazing to me when I will write a letter or an email to somebody about wanting to be on their podcast, and they will comment that I said please and I said thank you and things like that. It's like, well, that's the way I was raised. I sort of joke there were only 2 ways to die when I was a kid. That would be natural causes and talking back to your parents. So, my parents were very strict, and it was yes, ma'am, no, sir, no, no, ma'am, no, sir. So you were polite. You were a person, but my parents modeled that behavior. So it wasn't something, well, what do you mean, mom and dad? Do as I say, not as I do. No, my parents modeled that behavior.
Yeah. I love that. And I mean, and as you know, I have this little collection of videos from snippets from movies and TV shows and things like that inspire me. And one of my favorites, because I'm an 80s child, born in the 70s, but 80s child, was the Patrick Swayze movie Roadhouse, where he's a bouncer, but his ethos is be nice, ask them to leave, be nice. Which is really, I mean, because I was wondering about that from that perspective of with not having the role models. But from what I've seen, certainly, I mean, I have that all the time, like you. I mean, I open doors for people, and it doesn't matter who it is. But I also have many other people say, "Oh no, you go." Like getting out of an elevator, people say, "Oh, you go first." And we were joking in the pre-show about not doing the Three Stooges. We were all going backwards and forwards, and it's like, okay, I offered, but you said I go first, so I'll go first, no problem. Um, and is it, from that perspective, is it more a case of the screechy wheel gets the oil in this space, especially with social media, where there's a minority out there that are yelling and screaming quite loudly, but the majority of us are going about our business being that role model? Is that the case, or is it a really, is it really the majority out there that are behaving like jerks?
I want to say something, but it's gonna come across racist, and I don't want it to. And here's what I'm going to say: if you look at the African American community in the United States, before the civil rights movement in the 1960s, the vast majority of African American families were two-parent families, where it was a mom and dad, raising children. And there were maybe 20% of the families that were single-person families. Today, it's just the opposite. 70% of the African American families are headed by a woman, a mom. And those are the statistics. I'm not making that up, but I can also back it up for my time when I was in law enforcement. My partner and I ran an entirely African American beat area, and you would find a 13-year-old kid out, on a school night at 3:00 in the morning, and you would take him home, and almost invariably it would be a single mom, or even worse, the 75-year-old grandmother who was trying to raise that young man who, went to bed at 8:00 at night. And of course, grandma goes to bed. What's a 13-year-old kid going to do? Get in trouble. They're going to be out. They're going to be doing things and stuff like that. So if you don't have the role models in the home, if you don't have the role models in the family, how do you expect these young people? You can understand now why they do the dumb things that they do. They get themselves in trouble. They're in gangs and things like that. We need to get back to where a family is a mom and dad raising a kid, or two people raising a child, and we need the male and the female role models in our lives.
And is that the void that's there? Because they talked about, and there was an article at the start of this year, in January this year, about Andrew Tate getting hold of young men in Australia. And is it a case, because we don't have those role models being projected out there? I think they're there. I just don't think good news. Good news. It depends on which circle you're in, but certainly in the mainstream media, good and bad news sells. So it's always that focus, and I think I will get to that in a minute. But is it a case where there is that perceived void there, or it's certainly not being promoted, that there are some really, really good role models out there, that the people that are a little bit lost, they don't have their role model, they're only seeing some other people, and then they're drawn to that because they're for starvation of anything. You want something.
You do. I mean, you crave somebody to teach me how to be a man. Teach me how to be a woman. Teach me how to live in this world, that I'm going to be thrust into. And when I was a young man, I volunteered my time for a program called Big Brothers Big Sisters, and it was basically a mentorship type of program to kids that didn't have fathers or didn't have mothers, and I didn't do anything special with my little brother, but I mean, that was 30, 40 years ago. And I'm still in touch with him. And he's in the Coast Guard here in the United States. He's married. He's got children. I mean, he's a great young man. I like to think I had a little bit to do with that. But, it's organizations like that, Big Brother, Big Sister. But then, you look at traditionally, where have people learned morals and values and things like that? Well, the church. Well, I mean, there's a decrease in the amount, of people that are, that believe in God, that attend formal church services and stuff like that. Certainly, the whole priest issue with the Catholic Church didn't help that. I mean, that you look at issues in schools. Coaches. I mean, we had a Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts program here. I don't know if you have that in Australia as well. Well, then you find out. Okay,
I was a Cub.
You work up. See, I wanted to do it. My dad was like, "No, you're involved in too much stuff. You got basketball, you got all this stuff, so you couldn't." But I wanted to do that, because it seemed pretty neat. And those were role models. You're going to learn skills. You're going to learn how to interact. And I always felt sports. What does sports teach you? It teaches you how to be a member of a team. It teaches you how to win. It teaches you how to lose. It teaches you how to deal with your emotions. All those kind of things. So there are pockets, there are things around, but, are you involved in that? Or are you sitting at home, like you say, on your computer, worrying about what, the school bully's going to say about what, the shirt you had on today? Oh, I really like it. Oh, okay, I'm good. Or, oh, you were an idiot for wearing that shirt. Oh, no, today's been a bad day. Why do you care what somebody else thinks of you if they're not a person who cares about you, who loves you, who supports you, who makes you better? If you don't have those people in your life, it's awful hard to surround yourself with idiots who are full of drama and it's all about them. Like you said, who are you going to gravitate to? You're going to gravitate to somebody. Hopefully it's good people, but so many don't.
Yeah. How do you think we can bring that back? I mean, is it a case of those groups? I mean, the groups still exist. I mean, you mentioned the church, that still exists. There's still, other groups as well. How do we bring that back? How do we make them cool, so to speak, so that people want to go to them?
I don't know if I have an answer to that. I mean, I don't think there's one, silver bullet or magic bullet that if we did this, then everything would be great. I mean, I think so many people want that. We want to solve homelessness. Well, here's what we're going to do. Well, people have been trying stuff for homelessness for millennia. Since back in Jesus's time. People have been homeless. How do we deal with that? I don't know. I mean, I can't change the world, but I can change my little piece of it by changing myself, by acting the right way, by acting as a role model, by trying to do the right thing, by being a person of character, by being humble, by, saying, hey, yeah, it's cool to be smart and have an education and be a lifelong learner and read and understand people. We don't understand people. We understand technology, but we don't understand people. And if we can't understand each other, we're glued to this device, and I may have told you this, there's a book called Do Hard Things. It's written by a man by the name of Steve Magnus. It's a really good book. And he tells a story in there, and I don't remember if it's a professor or a researcher or whatever, but he basically took mostly young people and put them in a room. And the only thing in the room was a table and a chair. They were not allowed to have any devices, no earbuds, and nothing. Just the table and a chair. The only other thing in the room was a buzzer. And if you press the buzzer, you got an electric shock. 78% of the men and 25% of the women shocked themselves, including one guy who shocked himself every 5 seconds. And what that told the researcher was, we are so connected. Our validity, our who we are as a person is connected to these devices, and we are not comfortable in our own skin. We need to learn to be comfortable with us. And and ever since I read that, I do this, and I'm old. I can barely turn my cell phone on at all. So, I mean, that's not a problem for me. But I spend 5 or 10 minutes every day just sitting alone with myself, not meditating, not praying, but sitting alone with myself with the understanding that I need to be comfortable with me. And I think maybe that's a start. Be comfortable with who you are as a person, not what other people determine you are, but with yourself. Maybe that's a good way to start. And then each of us individually trying to model what good behavior would be.
Being comfortable with yourself. I love that. And a couple of people actually said, there's 3.9 something billion men on the planet. Therefore, there's 3.9 billion something ways of being manly. And is that really what we need to be? Because from that perspective, I relate to that. I think I've told you before. I do my gumping. I have a big lawn down here at the beach house, and I got rid of the gardener, and I bought myself a self-propelled lawnmower, and I go out there, no headphones or anything like that. I don't sit on it, so you got to walk behind it. And sometimes the lawn doesn't need mowing, but I'll just go out there and it's like the people that go fishing without putting a worm on the hook. I just want, right. I don't even want the fish to
I'm not catching anything. Yeah.
I don't want to be disturbed by the fish. I just want some time.
Yeah.
And it's, being comfortable with yourself. I mean, is that, part of what this framework is find your space, your pace, what's right for you.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think so many people, we're all on our own path in life. And that path is not, my path is not your path. Your path is not your wife's path. Your wife's path is not her mother's path. But we tend to look around and say, and we talked about this a minute ago, well, that person makes a lot of money. I want to be like that person. Or, we tend to look at the things that people have, the things that glitter, and I want that stuff. We can't be, and I think this is where we need to change. We can't be thankful or, grateful that person had, hey, great job. You worked hard. You got that. No, we've got to be jealous. We've got to be envious of what they have. And when you do that, now you're off your path. You're trying to live somebody else's life. You're trying to be on somebody else's path. No, you have unique gifts and talents. We all can't be millionaires. We all can't be billionaires. I mean, there's kings and there's king makers. Most of us are king makers. We do what we do based on what we like, what we enjoy, or we should do. But so many people, and my wife had a mentor. This guy was on Wall Street in the United States. He had multiple homes, multiple cars, a family that broke up because he was never around. And 5 years ago, he killed himself. I mean, you and I would look at him and say, that guy's got everything. He had everything but love. He had everything but an ability to say, I am worthy, that there are important things in my life. And I think that goes back to values. What do we value in life? What do you value in life? If you can answer that question, then you can start thinking about, well, what are my goals and how do I want to make an impact on the world? But if you don't know your values, just like if you don't know yourself, if you're not comfortable with yourself, it's awful hard, to make New Year's resolutions, to make goals and to make those things happen. That's why so many of those things fail so quickly after we make them. Yeah. We don't have any values. They're not tied to anything.
Yeah. I love that, knowing what your values are. I did that exercise with my son. We actually, maybe because we're still part of the colony here in Australia, we decided we were going to make a family coat of arms. And my son, he decided, because I asked him what animals do we want on it, and Komodo dragon was so we've got a Komodo dragon as the main. And
there you go.
If you look at a Komodo dragon, it's like fierce and, it goes its own way, that kind of thing. He wanted ants on there, so because they were industrious and things like that. So we got so it was a lot of fun to work through that and create that. And from that, define. We had values anyway. I have a family motto. I actually had got this massive wood fireplace made. Those fire pits. So it's an octagon in shape. And on the side, we've got the house name is Potentia, which is, I forgot now, it's Latin for leader or something like that, but it's a female strength, the exact meaning of that. But also we got the family values of honesty, excellence, and understanding engraved within this fireplace. It's really cool.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah, I think so. But it's just from that, it's when you're looking at that, I mean, you're talking about having that time for reflection. If I'm linking it back to what you were mentioning before, having a reflect, decide on what's right for you. Do you decide on that, or is it something that you have and it's kind of, I'm going to reference Star Wars here. It's like you control it or it controls you. Or is it a bit of both?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have an answer for that. I think I guess in my own life, looking at, how did I learn stuff? I certainly learned it from my parents. But I think one of the things that being part of a team, and we're all part of a team, whether it's our family, whether it's people we work with, whether it's other kids at school, whatever, we're all part of, group, I guess is a better way to say it than team. But I think one of the things that team sports taught me, and I honestly believe that down deep in our hearts, we all want this in some form or another, is what team sports taught me is to be part of something that's bigger than myself. That you realize that on a team, if you don't do your job, not only do you let yourself down, but you let your teammates down, your coaches down, your fans down, etc. And if you think about it, the biggest team game we all play is this game of life. So I think you've got to be part of a team. You've got to be part of something that's bigger than you. And when you find that, when you are part of that, you realize, I'm on a clinical trial drug for the cancer in my lungs that more than likely isn't going to save my life. But the way I look at it is, and the reason I continue to go for therapy is that maybe it's going to save the life of somebody 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that I will never meet based on the data that the doctors glean from my blood tests and my scans and things like that. And to me, that's being part of something that's bigger than myself.
I love that. What about from because you mentioned a couple of times beforehand, and this thing out there about men shouldn't cry and shouldn't ask for help. That's manly. But is it really? Because you mentioned crying, and from my perspective, I mean, you were in the SWAT, I was in the SAS here, and all the guys there could ask for help. They were pretty tough. They could all ask for help. They could all express emotions. Is that, is it manly not to express emotions or ask for help?
I don't think so. I think you have to be moved. I mean, that's what separates us from the animals in many cases is our emotions. And I think you need to express those. And there are days when I cry. Yeah, I mentioned that, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I think that we need to show. My daughter will tell you there's a baseball movie called Field of Dreams. Kevin Costner was in it. Great movie. You want me to cry? Show me that movie. Because at the end of that movie, I will cry every single time. And I've seen it 30 times. I will cry like a baby. And I don't care. Because to me, it was about a father and a son playing catch with each other. And, before I die, I would like to take my daughter to that field, that baseball diamond in Iowa here in the United States, and just have a catch with her. And like you want my bucket list? That's the one thing on my bucket list. I'd like to do that. But I mean, it's probably never going to happen, but that's okay. But that's the connection. The connection with me and my dad and me and my brothers was always athletics. It was always sports. And I, like I said, I didn't know anything about girls, daughters, anything like that, when I got married, because my whole life had been male dominated. And, it was like, honey, I'm going to raise you as best I can, not knowing what I'm doing. I'm going to rely on your mother a lot for this, but I am going to treat you, I want you to be tough. I want you to show your emotions. I want you. And like I said, she married me. She married, her husband is a lot like me. He cries. He's really smart. Okay. He's not like me in that regard, but I mean, in a lot of ways, yes, we have to, we're emotional people. I mean, we have emotions for a reason. God gave us emotions for a reason. I think it's important we show those. And somebody dies. It's okay to cry. I mean, you don't have to be tough and stoic and stuff. You don't have to, eat all that aggression. You don't have to eat all that stuff. Put it down. Wait, because eventually it's going to come back and bite you. You've got to grieve. You've got to deal with those things in life that we don't like. And if you do that, you're going to be much healthier, both physically and emotionally.
It sounds to me, what you're saying is actually sharing emotions is more about being brave and courageous than the opposite of what's portrayed for some people.
Yeah, I don't buy at all the men need to be stoic and never show them. I don't buy that. I think it's crap. Pardon my French. I think that's something that, I mean, that was my father's generation. I never saw my father cry until his mother died. And I was in college when that happened. Never saw my father cry.
But that's what I'm wondering from that perspective as well. Is that, is it a time and place thing where, you want, it's certainly if you want someone, if you take the extreme side of that, you look at, what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, and someone stubs their toe, you wouldn't want them to go, oh, I stubbed my toe and, I can't do anything. Is it, and that's an extreme, but even in everyday life, you look at it from that perspective, if there's an issue going on and you're the leader and you're breaking down and crying, going, I don't know what to do, you may not know what to do. But if you're the leader and projecting that, you're probably not going to stay the leader very long because people are going to lose faith in you. Is there a line as to where you show emotion, and do we need, and is it a case of having safe spaces where you can do that? So it might be a case, when you're with your wife and watching Field of Dreams and your daughter, and it's all, that's a nice safe space to do that. Out in, when you're out there with a 13-year-old child that you got to take home that might be being a bit belligerent, that's probably not the place to be crying. Is it contextual?
I don't know if it is. I mean, if I'm a leader, I mean, if I break down crying and I'm paralyzed, that's going to be a problem. You're right. You're not going to be the leader. But if I'm a leader, hopefully I've surrounded myself with people that will be able to. I think it's manly to say, I don't know what to do here. I remember my oncologist, I mean, this is a life and death situation. And I remember him looking at me at one point and saying, Terry, I don't know what to do. I don't know whether I should keep you on this drug or I should take you off and give your body a rest. And I sort of joked with him, like, gee, that's not something you want your doctor to say, but he was being honest. Yeah. And I think if you're honest and saying, I don't know the answer, but you know what, as the leader, I'm going to make a decision, maybe the wrong decision, but I'm going to make the decision. And here's my logic behind it. And I'm going to throw the logic out. You guys decide. I mean, am I missing something? Help me. As long as you surround yourself with good people as a leader, you can afford to be vulnerable. You can afford to say, I don't know the answer to this. Here's what I'm thinking. What do you guys think? But then at the end of the day, you got to make the decision. Yeah, if you're crying and you're paralyzed, that's not good at all. But being honest, being vulnerable, being open with people, I can't think of a more manly thing to be than those three things.
I love that definition, the way you described that, because it wasn't about, because no one can know the future. Right. So, and that's an acknowledgement of going, I don't know the future. Even you might have the best laid plans in the world and something changes. But what you're saying is, it's taking what you have and make a decision, if I'm hearing correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I think back on World War II, General Eisenhower, the D-Day invasion of Normandy. And I mean, here's a guy who, I'm going to send hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, tens of thousands of casualties and deaths, sat down before the invasion and wrote a letter basically saying, if this goes south, there's nobody to blame but me. It's all on me. And I mean, I think about what stress, what horrible thought. I mean, how do you sleep at night knowing you're sending these boys to die by the thousands? Yeah. But we had to do that, to unleash the Nazis and to get the world back on track. But you know what? Nobody's responsible. I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm going to write a letter basically because there's a really good chance that it might not, saying I'm responsible for this whole thing. I thought that was pretty manly.
I love that. So it's the courage to own your own actions. Is that what we're talking about, being manly?
You always make you make me sound really smart when you say these things. It's like, is that what you're saying? It's like, I didn't say that. But you put it into something that makes me sound smart. Thank you for doing that.
A very good representation of a dad. You're extremely smart. I love chatting with you.
You always make me sound smarter than I am, so thank you for that.
It seems, I don't know, I mean, because you started the conversation. You started the conversation talking about manly, and I'm going back to my notes here, Men are bold, brave, and valiant. That's how you started this conversation. And that's not to say women aren't. So for those of you about to jump up and down and write notes, feel free, because I'm not going to read them. But that's how you started that conversation. Is that the framework where we're talking about being manly comes back to your character and whatever? Because you mentioned as well going your own way, finding, having that quiet time to find your own values. Is that what that bold, brave, and valiant is? Just decide who you want to be. And you referenced in there as well, if I come back to the notes, if I can find it, where your dad, he treated others well, were the words that you used. So finding what values are right for you and treat others well, is that, if we were to put a nutshell around the framework of being manly, would that work, or what would you add to that?
I love that, but I guess that the nutshell is great. The big question, or the big elephant in the room, is how do you learn that? And for me, it was my mom and dad. Our parents showed us the value of family, of caring for each other, of loving each other, of supporting each other. They not only showed us, they not only modeled it, they talked to us about it. I remember my dad was dying of cancer, and I was a grown man, had my own job, and my youngest brother had a basketball game. And I remember saying to my dad, "Hey, I'm not going to Brian's game tonight. I'm going to go work out." And my dad's like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Oh, what? What do you mean? No, I'm not. I'm a man. You're telling me I can't go work out? You're not going." I'm like, "No, I'm going to work out." He said, "No, you're not. You're going to brother's game." I said, "I can go to other." No, I am sick. He knows that I'm sick. He knows I'm dying. He needs you there for your support. Again, that's my dad. And as me as an adult, reaffirming what mom and I have told you your whole life. Family is about caring each other, loving each other, supporting each other, being there for each other. You go work out some other time. You're going to your brother's game. And my dad was absolutely right. I found another time to work out. I was there to support my brother. But I was kind of, flexing my muscles, like, look at me. I can go work out, and stuff like, no. What's the important thing here? The important thing is family. And that was modeled by my parents. And so, yeah, if you can find the right people to model that behavior, that good behavior, yeah, you can put whatever shell, whatever nut you want to put around it and say, this is it. But that's, I think, where we're falling down. We don't have the people that are modeling it.
Well, you're certainly modeling it, and by sharing that on this podcast with other people, helping model that as well and share that into the world. And it seems to be there's a lot of goodness out there where people want to share these things and bring that back. So, Terry, I really appreciate it. I always love chatting with you. It's so much fun. And I love the humor, but I love the depth of knowledge that you share. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk about what is manly.
Well, thanks for having me on, Damien. I really appreciate it. I love talking with you as well. Thank you.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.